Are you streaming now, Sam?
Yeah.
That's great. So we'll put those on you. Turn this on. Right, thanks everybody for coming tonight. My name's Lee Anderson, I'm the Member of Parliament for Ashfield, and with me tonight I've got Severn Trent. I've got James Jessic, who's Operations Director, is that right, James?
Correct, yeah.
And Steve Witter, Asset Management, something like that?
Head of Network Control and Asset
Head of
Management.
Network Control. So we've got two VIPs from Severn Trent and several Severn Trent staff in the audience tonight. So it's Facebook Live, so we've got people asking questions, hopefully on Facebook. We've got people who's emailed in, and there's people in St Joseph's tonight who's going to be hopefully asking questions. So what I want to do, James, to start off with, is I'll have a bit of a go at you, and Severn Trent. It's twice now in the space of a year, and the hottest time of the year, that my residents in Huthwaite, Sutton, Stanthill, Skegby, Kirkby, Annesley have been without water. Now once is bad enough. That was a nightmare, but for it to happen twice, we don't think that's not acceptable. I don't think that's acceptable. My residents don't think it's acceptable. So I want to know, since the second time last month, what have Severn Trent done? What are you committing to do? And will you apologise to my residents unreservedly for the disruption? And let's be honest. We're in a pandemic, we've got people isolating, people couldn't leave the house, we've got vulnerable people that weren't getting water delivered to them. The community had to step up. I know Severn Trent did use their vulnerable list, that risk list, to get water out to people, but at the same time we had lots of people isolating that couldn't get water to them. I think that's unacceptable. So it's your chance tonight to say sorry and to explain to the residents what you're going to do for them.
Okay. Well, thank you. So I just want to start by thanking everybody and thanking Lee for giving us this opportunity really to just come and first of all apologise profusely to everybody for what happened, and also help explain what did happen and what we're doing about it. Hence the reason I've got Steve along with me tonight. So first of all, I do just want to reiterate that I am incredibly sorry for what happened. I take any event like this incredibly seriously. It's what I do. It's more than just a job for me. I'm really here about how do I provide the best customer service, and I have let Severn Trent down. I've let you guys down, more importantly, around what that service that we provide on a day-to-day basis. And we do take these sorts of things incredibly seriously. So I do just want to apologise to everybody that was impacted. I guess what we're talking about are two events, and if I may, Lee, I wanted to just run through what happened in May 2020 and then describe what happened in July 2021. The reason being that the events, although the outcome was similar, the events were very different, and I just want to help try and contextualise what happened, so when we explain what we're doing about it, we'll make a lot of sense. So I'm going to do that if that's okay. So first of all, and I'll let Steve go through this in a moment, the area itself is an incredibly complex network. So there are lots of pipes in the area, thousands of kilometres worth of pipes, and there are a number of treatment works and very large reservoirs that contain the water. Now generally what happens is we abstract the water, it's groundwater sources in this area, so the water's stored in aquifers. We take the water out, it's pumped into these large reservoirs and then distributed across the network. What happened in May 2020, you will all recall, I'm sure it's etched in everybody's memory, that was really when the pandemic started to bite and when we first had COVID hit the UK. During that time, we were going through our normal maintenance regimes, and during those maintenance regimes, we do take sites out of service. Now, typically, as you can imagine, we see lower water demand during the winter, and in the summer we then see higher demand as people start watering their gardens and having barbecues and getting all the friends around the garden, and therefore perhaps filling up paddling pools and that sort of stuff. So we do see high demand in the summer. And how we try and schedule our asset maintenance is that we will do a lot of our bulky asset work in the winter or in the autumn or spring when we can do that work and we've got capacity to do it, to make sure everything's running for the summer. And what happened in May 2020 is we were undertaking that usual maintenance regime, and the pandemic hit. And I'm sure many of you will have been impacted either in your personal life or through a working life, but basically that slowed a lot of the activity down that we were undertaking. So some of the sites that we planned to get back in for May didn't come back in until ultimately in the June. So what that meant we were in a slightly, we had slightly less capacity than we would normally have at the May period. Now, during May, typically, the demand levels that we had and the capacity that we had at that time would have been absolutely fine. We always have a level of headroom. It's Steve's and his team's job to make sure that we've got sufficient headroom to cope with the typical demand scenarios that we might see. Now, during May, if you will all recall, we were in lockdown, and this was the first proper lockdown when you weren't allowed to leave your house, if you remember. If you could, you were allowed to walk about 30 minutes from your home. The only place anybody could go was the garden. Everything was closed. You could send one person to a supermarket, and then the government opened up garden centres on the bank holiday weekend. That coincided with one of the driest Aprils we'd ever seen on record, and then we saw the driest May and one of the warmest Mays. It was the driest May on record and one of the warmest Mays that we'd ever seen. Water demand during that period went skyrocketed, absolutely skyrocketed. And just to give you some sort of context for this, and this is not an excuse, by the way, this is just me explaining the context behind what we saw in May. Now, what we see in those scenarios is typical usage. Most people, although people think they use around 20 litres per day, most people on average use around 140 to 150 litres of water per person per day. And during that period of time, the demand shot up to around 190, 200 litres per person per day. And if you think there's 2, 3, 4, 5 people in each house, the amount of water being used is a huge amount. So to be quite honest, that level of demand just outstripped what we could supply. There's plenty of water available underground where we were extracting from, treating from, but in terms of the capacity that we had to treat that water and supply it to people, we just could not keep up with demand. Hence the reason we saw the outages back in May 2020. Now, following on from that work, we undertook a whole review, as you can imagine. That was a devastating impact for us as a company, because we do know, and we genuinely take these things seriously about the impact that it has on local communities. I mean, Steve will, I'm talking a bit on Steve's behalf, Steve's a local guy around here, and Steve has got friends and family in Mansfield. He will get the feedback direct about the sort of impact that we're having. Similarly, I'm Birmingham born and bred, Severn Trent serves Birmingham. I know the impact that it has on those local communities. So we were devastated by that, and as a result, we really took a critical analysis of what we were doing. As a result, the assets that were out that we were working on very quickly came back in service, that we planned to do anyway. But we undertook a whole heap of additional activity to try and make sure that we had much more resilience across our network. That allowed us to bring water in from other areas into the system, in the Nottinghamshire system as a whole, and really provide us with enough water. So much so that we entered this year in a position where we had more than enough water, not only for Mansfield, but for the whole of Nottinghamshire. We had more than enough water, whatever the demand scenario. Even if we saw the 200 litres per person per day levels that we saw during the lockdown of the pandemic, we had enough water. So we really invested, really worked hard, really made sure that that was there. So we went into this year in a much better space. So that was the first incident. And what I'm going to do now is hand over to Steve, who will take to the second incident. But it's a very different set of scenarios to what happened. Steve, I don't know if you just want to chat that through.
Okay, thanks. So thanks Phil coming out. So Steve Witter, as Lee said, I'm the head of network control, which basically means my job is the guys and girls that work for me 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, are monitoring the pumps, the reservoirs, the pressure levels across our entire area. So, and I do take it quite personally. I was born and bred in Mansfield. I started down the road as an apprentice at 16, and my first job was to look after the Sutton Sewage Works at Unwin Road. So I do feel, a personal connection to the area. And as James said, I do have friends and family all around here. And hopefully some of you will have seen one of our team's vans who will work for James parked on the road outside. So, we do have people in every community. And I really want to stretch the point, which is, we are here. We feel we feel the need to give you the service that you deserve. So in those days running up to that weekend in July, we suffered a couple of asset failures. Now it'll be difficult to see, and I'm happy to do this afterwards in any detail. Up on the wall, you've got a schematic which shows there are a number of assets, number of reservoirs and a number of pumps that supply the areas that we're talking about. Now Lee's talked about quite a broad area, and now thankfully not all of those areas that Lee represents was affected this time, but you know, some do, and I again repeat the sincere apology for that. So it's a little bit more complex. It isn't as simple as one of the questions, the pump failed a year ago, why has it failed again? That wasn't the case. There was a number of things that happened. So in the days leading up to that weekend, we saw some asset failures on the Tuesday and the Wednesday of that week of July, and therefore we started, as James explained, we started to see some of our storage levels reduced. Now they weren't to a point of any incident status. We still had plenty of headroom. However, we were then faced with some further issues. We had a number of key members of staff who were pinged to self-isolate. So just like everybody else in the community, we then had additional, we had less resources, physical people resources to be able to deploy. But we also have some quite specialist skills in these areas in terms of electrical, mechanical and instrumentation. And we had to wait for some people to get enough rest time to be able to come back into work. As a result, over the Thursday and the Friday, we saw further reductions, twinned with what we've described as almost a perfect storm. We then had power outages at a couple of our key sites, which were not our fault, but we know that we have to cope with those, and that's why we build contingency into the process. So to get into a bit of detail then, the two main sites that supply the Kirkby and Ashfield, Huthwaite and the area of Sutton and Annesley that were affected are a reservoir up at Huthwaite called Whiteborough, and then there's a reservoir at the crossroads as you go out of Kirkby, which is called Diamond Avenue. So hopefully some of you that are local will know the two sites. Now the sites are joined together by pipes, and there are different ways of us getting water in and out of both of those. The thing that is common to both Whiteborough and Diamond Avenue is that they are low in the ground, for those of you that live in that area and could actually see where they are, compared to the houses that are quite close by. So answers to some of the questions that you have asked already is why do people go on and off at different times, etc. It's a simple hydraulic equation, which is the level of water in a reservoir has got to be higher than where you're trying to take it out of. So if you're an upstairs flat, for example, your water would go off quicker than somebody who would be in a downstairs flat, if that makes sense. So at the two sites we have a set of booster pumps, and those booster pumps need a certain amount of water in the reservoir to keep them primed. So to keep water into the inlet of the pump, so therefore it can pump water out. So the first people that go without water are those that are in two distinct areas, close to Diamond Avenue and close to Whiteborough. So what happens then is some customers start to experience either low pressure or intermittent pressure, and then eventually the pumps will kick out. Now we see that, we know those pumps have gone off, but of course we don't know exactly which customers have gone off, because we don't know your internal pipe work. For example, you may still have a storage tank in your loft, your pipe may go, again, you may be upstairs flat, or you may be off a long run, some of the older sort of terraced houses where there might be 10 properties off the same pipe. And if you're at the end, and quite frankly, there's news on the, if there's news out there on social media about water shortages, you also get people, understandably, who will fill saucepans or even fill a bath, and that will then exacerbate the problem because other customers down the road will then also have that compounded. So the solution comes, we have to get enough water into those reservoirs to get that level up. And if we are doing any routine maintenance on those pumps, for example, we'll carry that out in the middle of the night, and we'll do that with a lot of criteria in place to make sure that customers don't see any impact at all. When this scenario happens and it drops to a low level, we then have to get enough water in to get it high enough for the pumps to start. And that's why you end up with this, unfortunately, for you as customers, you end up with this delay where it probably on the ground looks like we as a water company aren't doing anything. Because we're pumping into the reservoir as fast as we can, and of course other people are still using, but we have to get it to a level where we can then pump it. In addition, what we do is we install hydrants, which you'll probably see people like the fire brigade using, or even street cleaners, etc., filling from, to give you an idea if you don't know what a hydrant looks like. But we can inject into a hydrant. So for some of you will have seen some of our guys and girls out there with a kit where we have got pumps and pipes, and we'll literally tanker the water to where it's needed, and then tanker into the area. Now, many customers who aren't here tonight, who are local, would have benefited without even knowing that we were doing that. Because we're not injecting outside your house. We might be injected into a reservoir that's a few miles away, but it's providing that bit extra water, which means many customers would never have even known. And we do this day in, day out. So it's not, we do this whenever we need to, because we get burst mains, we get contractors that will dig through our mains by accident, all house builders, old factories getting knocked down, they'll think the main's dead and pull it out the ground. This is what we do. So we do this day in, day out, 7 days a week, 24 hours a day. So that's what happened to get us to where we were. And then on that day where people started to go without water, we had got literally all hands to the pump, getting more and more water that we could get into the area, getting the resource that we needed to increase flows where we could, and again get more and more water into the area. And that just takes a bit of time. One of the questions that I know was posed, I've heard and I've seen on Facebook myself, was around why it sort of went off and then went back on again. So there's a bit of context again there. Is what happened in both scenarios is some of you would have gone to bed with no water, and then obviously when demand drops, the reservoirs fill much more quickly overnight, which is what happens every night. The reservoirs fill up, and then depending on the area and depending on what time people get up, basically, so that can depend on whether it's school holiday or not, those kind of issues. Then people come on, they start to use the water that's been stored overnight, and depending how much you've managed to store versus how much is being used, what happened again in this instance, the following morning at 6 o'clock, some supplies went off again. Because we'd used overnight, all the toilets would have filled, so people could at least have flushed those. But some people trying to go and get a drink of water, I'll say after 6 o'clock, but again, depending on where you are. Because if you were in most of the area, it was absolutely fine. Now, you may have had slightly lower pressure, you may have had water downstairs and not upstairs, but unfortunately for some folks, they had no water at all. So, having made all of those changes, it took some time. We lost the supplies again that night, and then the following day and through the following night, everything from our perspective was back to normal. One of the other issues to make sure people are aware of, because we often get individual then customers saying, well, you're saying on social media everybody's on, I'm not on. So the best example I use is if you've ever drained your central heating system, when you go to fill it back up, you can often get an airlock in one of the radiators and it doesn't warm up. It's exactly the same for a water distribution system. So when you fill it up, you can get airlocks in up to individual properties. So as far as we know, because we have lots of sensors and monitors in the network, but we don't have one in every single house. So we'll be able to see on your street that you're ringing from, that our monitor is saying, yes, pressure is there, but obviously you're opening your tap and saying, that's not what I'm seeing. And that's very often an internal plumbing issue, or it can be a problem with the external stop tap or boundary box. That's on our side. And then we will, of course, dispatch an engineer to look at that particular issue or talk the customer through on the phone the way to check their stop tap to resolve it. So hopefully that gives you some idea of what happened up to getting to that point. And then, of course, James and I and many of the team spent spent shifts that week in the control centre, making sure we could resolve it as quickly as possible. And then as soon as we came back to work the following week, the first thing that James asked me to do was to lead an independent inquiry as to what had happened, what had gone wrong, or what had not gone as well even as we could have done, because we weren't happy with what the risk that we took in some areas because supplies were low, but actually those customers never suffered at all. We want to make sure that we're even sort of better next time. So we've taken a number of actions. We've identified some different ways of bringing additional water in. So to give some idea, so Whiteborough is, Diamond Avenue. So Diamond Avenue is around 15 megalitres, 15 million litres. So if you've ever seen anybody washing wheelie bins, etc., they tend to bring a pallet-sized, what's called an IBC, a plastic tank, that's a metre by a metre, that's 1,000 litres, to give you a sort of idea. So 1 million litres, 10% of Diamond Avenue's flow required is about 2 megalitres. And that would have made all the difference. So some of our engineers have identified a couple of innovative ways of using the Southstone Reservoir, if anybody knows where that is, up the little narrow road, to be able to get an extra 2 megalitres through the Southstone. We've got to lay some pipes down the road, and we'll be able to get that 2 megalitres into Diamond Avenue. Now that at the moment is a desktop exercise. It needs the hydraulic engineers to go through that with a fine tooth comb. The 2 megalitres at the moment is assumed. We've got a lot more work to do on that, but that in itself, that action would have almost certainly prevented everything that was experienced in the Kirkby, Sutton, Annesley area. We've got equally innovative ideas to do exactly the same at Whiteborough. But I have to say, these are all belt and braces, because as James said, without those sequence of events, we would never need those. But we as an organisation have recognised they're sort of almost hollow promises to speak to any resident to say, well, it won't happen again, because as Lee said in his intro, it's happened twice. Yeah. So the reasonable question is, well, why would it not happen a third time then? And I've come to say, I'll make it my job to ensure it doesn't happen, and with James's help, we will look to invest where we need to, and that's not just in physical pipes in the ground. So we're also looking to invest in technical skills to have more people available. So if it were to ever happen again, because who would have thought the pandemic would happen? Who would have thought there'd be numerous lockdowns? So there's a flavour of some of the solutions that we've looked to put in place.
All right, thanks. Thanks Steve, thanks James. So, after excuses there, or reasons, valid reasons why, I want to have a bit of a pop at you, because this seems to be happening in Ashfield far too often and not other areas of the country. It's not happening in Mansfield, it's not happening in South Normanton, it's not happening in Western Nottinghamshire, it's just Ashfield it's happening. So we hear what you say, the reasons why. Why isn't it happening in any other area of Nottinghamshire?
This is the nature of the distribution area, to be honest, the way the pipes are set up in this system. So as Steve laid out, we've got the Diamond Avenue Reservoir and we've got the Whiteborough Reservoir. It all depends on where you sit on the distribution network. So if there is a problem with that reservoir, generally what you will find is, if there's a problem, the same people tend to be impacted. Now what we've done is really take that on board, and I mean, these reservoirs are huge. You can imagine there's many thousands of people that are fed off these reservoirs, and at no time did these reservoirs ever actually go empty. It was the fact that these reservoir levels dropped below the pumping levels that we had. Those pumps feed the two areas that you just mentioned. So we've done a couple of things. So first and foremost, we do have quite those pumps themselves, we have what we call a duty standby system. So whenever there's water in the reservoir above the level of the feed pumps, they will always work. If one fails, the other one will kick in automatically, and your service will be not disrupted at all. So we've gone back round and made sure that system still works as it should, and absolutely should. As Steve said, we've now facilitated the opportunity to bring additional water into the area to make sure that we always try and maintain the levels above those pipe levels themselves. That will mitigate the risk of anything else happening. We're bringing in additional technical skills into the area and additional resources into the area. So if we do have the pandemic continue or the Delta variant takes off, we will actually be able to bring in resources from neighbouring counties to help in this particular area itself. And one of the things that we've been doing, as you will know, Lee, is the government were looking, I know it's changed now because of the pandemic rules have changed, but the government were looking at how do they take key workers out of the pandemic part, and we were actually involved in conversations in that in the background as part of the industry. But we've made additional resources available to go and fix any asset particular problems. So this is no longer, and never was post-May 2020, is there enough water? There is enough water. This is around how do we make sure that should we see a problem on our asset base, that we respond to it quickly and effectively to make sure there's no issues. I can't sit here today and say I will never have another asset failure across my estate. I've got 140,000 kilometres worth of pipework.
Yep, get that.
We've got hundreds of thousands of assets. It's our job to make sure that when we do have it, we maintain them as well as we can so we don't have a problem. And when we do have a problem, we respond effectively. So we think with the investments that we've identified, with the network improvements, which we'll be able to inject tankers into different positions, we'll be able to mitigate the effect of that happening again.
Okay, so I've got a few questions here what residents have emailed in. I can't ask all, we've not got enough time. So it says in future, and I hope there's not a future in this, it says in future can we please have a distribution centre that is a lot nearer and accessible for all, please. Now, when I first got alerted to this incident, it was Uthwaite which was affected first. So I spoke to your chief exec and asked for a water station in Uthwaite, not in Sutton as it was last time. The following morning I had residents from Sutton, which by the way he provided a water station there. The following morning I got residents from Sutton asking for a water station. I asked for a water station in Sutton, which he kindly did. We got water to the Oval and surrounding areas. And then just a few hours later we had a problem in Kirkby, after Severn Trent told me all the water was coming back on. So we had a problem in Kirkby and Annesley, and I asked for a water station to be put in Morrison's at Kirkby, and you didn't do it. So I had residents, bombarding my office, not Severn Trent, bombarding my office, my staff, to say, why haven't we got a water station in Kirkby? Now, bearing in mind that the comms throughout this incident was awful from Severn Trent. My constituents, my residents were 2 hours ahead of you, ahead of the game all the time. They were telling me stuff. I was calling Severn Trent, they were denying it, and then coming back to me an hour later saying, actually, you're right, this happened. That was absolutely awful. So when people are without water, especially during a pandemic, when people are isolating, people can't get out, people are vulnerable, I want to know why when I asked for water to be put in Kirkby, you didn't do it.
Okay. So there's a couple of really valid points there. I think in terms of if we can just address the comms piece first of all, absolutely correct. Our comms were not good enough with customers in terms of what happened and what we were doing about it. Now we do have at Severn Trent this option for people if they wish to, where if you provide your mobile phone number with your account, we will text people directly when there is an issue, tell them what's happening and how long things will take to resolve. So I would encourage everybody, if they'd like to really make sure they register their mobile phone or email details on their account, and then we can contact people direct. So that's the first thing. In terms of the bottled water station, you're absolutely correct, Lee. You did speak to us. In fact, I'm going to give you a bit more credit than that. I wanted to put a bottled water station somewhere else, and you said to me directly, don't put it there, nobody can get to it, it's too far away, put it here instead. And that's exactly what we did. So, that local insight was invaluable, and I think that's another learning from us about how do we make sure we really truly tapped in better, not only to the local resilience forums, but people like yourself and councillors and everything else, to make sure that we are putting these things in the right place where it is accessible for people and not going to cause chaos on the roads. When we got the request, so the first two we put in, it takes around 4 to 8 hours, believe it or not, to establish a bottled water station. And the reason for that is the bottled water is not all stored in every area across our region. There is a store on one of our own sites that's fairly central.
Yeah.
And also we use contractors to bring in more water should we need it. It takes a good few hours to get the appropriate wagons to site to load that on, and then to get those bottles to the particular area, and then offload them again, as well as get volunteers there and all that sort of stuff, and agree with councils which areas we can use. I think in hindsight we thought that the request for the third bottled water station, because we had all the problems resolved, we were expecting the system to fill up quicker than it actually did. And I think in hindsight, we should have perhaps called that bottled water station earlier on and got it established. So I guess from me, I'd just like to say apologies again to everybody. I think in hindsight, we should have and could have put a bottled water station there. We didn't, but it's certainly something that we will learn from for future reference.
Okay, so lots of people are telling me on Facebook here now that Severn Trent Water have their mobile numbers, but they weren't receiving alerts by text message.
Okay, that's interesting. So we will look into that and just check what the issues were. I will just ask everybody just to double check and make sure that's correct and that the numbers are definitely on the system. So if they have done, that's brilliant. We will just look into why those customers didn't receive a text message. I know one of the other things that's been raised is around the priority services register as well.
Yeah.
The priority, for those of you that don't know, priority services register is basically a list of specific customers that have specific needs and therefore perhaps require a bit of extra care and attention when things go wrong. So for instance, we have customers who are on dialysis on our priority service registers. We have new mothers on our priority service register, people who need a bit more support when there are problems. Again, having seen the question, there are people saying that they think they should be on the priority service register and they're not. Again, I would just encourage everybody, where you think you should be, or you know members of your family or perhaps friends or other relatives that should be on the register, please contact us and we can put you on that register and make sure that, if we hope there obviously isn't, and we're doing everything we can to make sure there isn't, but if there is a problem again in the future, that you will get the due care and attention that is needed, that little bit of special extra care that people who are perhaps vulnerable do need.
Okay, so I've got Joanne who runs the Ashfield support group locally, who helped during the first incident last year, and once again stepped up and helped out again to get water out to vulnerable people, the ones that slipped through your net. And she's saying to me, how come that her volunteers were turned away from water stations when they got the list of the vulnerable people? They was trying to collect obviously bottles of water to take out for their list, and they was turned away from one of your water stations.
Oh, were they? Okay, so I wasn't aware of that. Again, we will build that into our process. Steve looks after the establishment of those bottled water stations, and we will just make sure that's fed in. So again, apologies that was the case. I know that people like that who do step into that space, it's incredible. It's an incredible gesture to go and pick up water for other people. It's just a wonderful thing to do. So
yeah,
for making that more difficult, again, we apologise, and we will make sure we build that into our processes.
So Jodie on Facebook, Jodie Atherton's just said, I'm on the register and still didn't have a call or no water delivered.
Okay, so if Jodie would like to send us her specific details, we can perhaps get those details afterwards. We can always give Jodie a call and just...
And it's worth saying the priority service register is to cover all kinds of... So being on it doesn't necessarily mean you would get water delivered to your house, depending on the circumstances. So I wouldn't want people to think it's some kind of golden ticket, because that's not the case. Everybody is then given appropriate support based on their personal circumstances.
Yeah, as you can imagine, there are people that, whilst there's a priority register, there are people that will require a greater priority than others. If somebody is on a dialysis machine, they will be near the top of the list, sort of thing, to make sure we respond to those first. So
Dale says, why aren't we all a priority? Because water is a basic human right.
Dale, it's a fair comment. I think we obviously, there's a customer base that we've got. We have to make sure that we do the best we can for all our customers. But obviously, when times go wrong, we need to prioritise those customers, like in all walks of life, that do need that additional help. So hence the reason that we do have a priority services register. But again, apologies for the disruption that was felt.
Gentleman at the back.
Good afternoon, chaps. Thanks for coming. Before I ask, you've explained to us about the system, which I appreciate, and I dare say we all do. You say that on paper that you're looking into an exercise now, you know, to get all this resolved. Now that's paper. So how long are you estimating that you're going to get to the end product, i.e., so we then don't get, you know, problems again? Because at the moment, this can all happen again as we stand now. And the other thing is I read in the local chat, I think it was, that you say that you sympathise and you know how we feel. Can I ask, have you ever had your water cut off for 2 days? And if not, would you like to go home and not turn your taps on, go out to work and have no water for 2 days and come home sweaty? Because this well, ex-mining community, as we'll tell you, and just try that with 2 days, take your taps off and say, right, I know how they feel now, because I bet you've never had it for 2 days, do you?
So I think really good questions. I mean, first of all, in terms of can this happen today, are we in the same situation? We're absolutely not. So first of all, the issues on the sites where we had the problems, those assets have been fixed. They are in a good working order now. They are fully up to speed and working well, and they've been tested beyond an inch of their life and working perfectly fine. So that scenario that led to the situation is not the case at the moment. The second thing that we've done is, as Steve alluded to, we're looking at technical competence. We've already increased the amount of resource available for this particular area. We will do even more and go beyond that to make sure that if we do see a scenario whereby we do lose a number of staff, which means that they can't respond, that we will correct that issue. It's available now, and we will just make it even more robust than it is today. The third thing that we've, again, already done, we have installed capability on our network to increase the amount of water that we can directly inject into the network itself from tankers. Now, I'm going to be honest, that's not a pleasant experience when we're doing that. The tankers can be quite noisy, and if you've got a tanker in your street and it's injecting into our main, it is a noisy process. But we see that as a better option than people not having water. So that, exactly that. So those things are in place today. The other things that Steve's described, in effect, a further level of bolt and braces into the particular area to make sure we can bring more water in. So already today, we've got more water available. We've got more options to bring in additional water should we see a problem from tankers. And we've got more technical capable resource to step in should we have a problem with our resource, as well as the assets themselves being fixed. So the scenario that led up to that event, it won't happen tomorrow, I guarantee it. What we will do is just further improve the robustness around that. So that's that one. In terms of your question around have I been personally, I can't speak on Steve's behalf obviously, but have I personally been 2 days without water? I haven't, if I'm being honest. I'll be honest, I haven't been without water for 2 days. I have had water supply interruptions, and I've also been working for Severn Trent for 18 years. I have dealt with many customers during that period who have suffered extended water losses. So I know, and of course I've got family who live in other areas, can I add quickly, who have been in that situation. So I know full well the impact that has on people. I fully understand it, and I know how disruptive it can be for anybody, whether you're young, old, whether you've got children, whether you haven't got children, the impact of not having water. And again, it's just something that I just want to apologise directly to you two, and also direct to anybody else that was affected. I don't think there's anything I missed, Steve.
I don't think there is.
So there's a good question here, gents. It says, since the pandemic, many of us are continuing to work from home, and as a result, the demand for water is now significantly different to what it was a couple of years ago. It's correct. And it's my view that supply has not followed suit. I'd like this to be acknowledged, and I want to understand what is being done to ensure availability across the whole region all of the time. I think that's a fair question.
It is a fair question. I think absolutely correct. Since the pandemic, we have seen a shift in demand. So just to bring that to context and bring that to life a bit, before the pandemic, people on average, and you know, I might get these numbers slightly wrong, used around 140 litres per person per day. and that was on a declining trend. But that's still 140 litres per person per day. And, you know, again, just to bring that to life a little bit, every time you flush your toilet, that uses 8 litres of water. And most people go to the toilet 6 to 8 times a day. And that's not, I'm not going to run a quick survey, but that's generally how it works. So people do use an awful lot of water anyway. Now, during the pandemic, you will all remember we were going through the hand washing exercise where everyone had to wash their hands profusely every 30 minutes, all that sort of stuff. On average, people were using around 10 litres of additional water per day. That's every single person, so that's not per property. If you've got 3, 4, 5 people in your house, that's 30, 40, 50 litres per person more per day. What we've seen as well is with the changes in the pandemic, the pandemic actually made people, I think, appreciate things like their gardens a lot more. People spent a lot more money and a lot more time in their garden, and therefore they want to look after their garden and they want to use their hose pipes. That also drove up demand. And also now, much to my own displeasure, if I'm being honest with you, you can buy an extremely large paddling pool, stroke swimming pool from Aldi now for about 80 quid. Those things take 2 days with a hose pipe running constantly to fill up. A hose pipe uses as much as a family of 4 does in a week in 1 hour. So that's just giving you an idea of scale of the amount of water that is used. So absolutely correct. Demand for water has increased over time since the pandemic. In terms of do we have enough water for Nottinghamshire, I think May 2020 we were caught out, and I think I went through that at the start in terms of we had assets that if they'd been in supply, they would have met that demand quite comfortably. They were out for maintenance, and the scenario that we saw, the unique scenario we saw with the pandemic, meant that we were caught out. We didn't quite have enough water in the area. The changes that we've made and the fact that those assets are all back in service meant we absolutely do fundamentally have enough water, not only for the Ashfield areas, but Mansfield, for the whole of Nottinghamshire. There is more than enough water during peak demand periods when people, you know, we are seeing a 34-degree day. The issue in this instance, as Steve articulated, was due to the way that the assets failed. The high demand meant that our reservoirs dropped much quicker, and then it took us longer to recover, and that's what drove the issue. So there is enough water. It's down to us to make sure that our assets are running all the time, and that we put sufficient resilience in our network to make sure that should we see a problem in the future, that people don't know about it. That's the best we can offer.
So quite a few people are saying that you're using the pandemic as an excuse that they're run out of water, which I understand because, like I said before, it's just Ashfield that was without water, and you banged on tonight about the pandemic and about people spending more time at home, which I get, people watering the garden, people didn't, blah blah blah. But you know, revert back to the fact that it's just Ashfield again, and people don't want to see you playing the pandemic, and people staying at home and people isolating. People want that acknowledgement that Severn Trent are at fault, and what I want to know is on a timescale of the investment I was promised by your chief executive. The last phone call I had with her a few weeks back, she assured me that Ashfield will be prioritised with extra investment into the infrastructure, Huthwaite, Sutton and Kirkby. So I want to know when that starts, how much you're spending, and when will it be finished.
Okay, so I think, first of all, I mean, if it's come across that I'm blaming the pandemic, that's absolutely not the case. I'm just trying to give some explanation really as to why we've seen the high levels of demand. This failure in July was on us. It was completely on us. We got it wrong. We allowed a situation to develop, and we didn't have sufficient technical, or we couldn't respond quickly enough to losing some of our staff and losing the assets to make sure that the supplies remained on. So that is completely on us, and again, I apologise unreservedly for that. But so I'm not blaming the pandemic. This was definitely on us. In terms of the additional investment, we have already spent thousands of pounds in terms of putting some of these issues right. So we have brought in assets and improved the maintenance on those particular assets. It costs, some of these assets are incredibly large, incredibly complex, and it costs a lot of money to get back into or improve the resilience of those particular assets. That's already been done. We've also spent many thousands of pounds in terms of increasing these options to inject tankers as described into the network, and Steve described into the network. What's the average cost of installation?
So it's about 6,000.
6,000
for a straightforward. But of course, if it's in a location where you need traffic management, etc., we have to get notification and permission from the council. So some of it can take, some of these things can take longer.
Yeah.
We have to make sure we are prioritising the spend in the right areas, because to James's point, we'd rather not be using tankers of water. That we are better than that as a company, and we think that you deserve more than that as customers. But that's our backstop, if you like. That's our last resort. What we really want to do is to get some of these permanent solutions, hardwired in.
Yeah.
And we're already on that journey. So please don't think this is a pie in the sky years away. We're already on with this. I don't, as much as I've enjoyed the evening so far, I don't want to be back here next year having to explain it again.
Yeah,
I'd much rather be at a community event, supporting some of the initiatives that for people that have helped out during this and deserve to use their time for better.
You mean investing money in local projects?
Absolutely.
Like in Ashfield?
Yeah.
Okay. Julia?
Yeah, thank you. I'm Julia Long, I'm from Kirkby in Ashfield, and I was one of the community that actually took 1 hour to set up something in the badge box to give people water. And that was a convoy of cars going to Uthwaite, going to Sutton Oval to fetch water, which was stopped after about 4 carloads because they said we were selling it. It was a disgrace. And people were queuing all the way around the badge box. Everybody in Ashfield understands you have technical difficulties. Everybody understands that. It's not an excuse. We know you have it. What we don't understand is your lack of communication. It was absolutely disgraceful. Nobody knew when the water was going to go off. Nobody knew when the water was going to come on. You talked earlier on about your phones and that you send messages. I got a text message at 11 o'clock telling me not to use my hose pipe, not to water the garden. By 11:30, my water was off, and I hadn't used the hose pipe, and everybody else's was as well. Nobody told me it was going off, so I didn't have time to fill anything up. And then I had another one saying your water's back on, when it wasn't. I had people that was emailing me and messaging me to say that they got COVID, how could we get any water? So Joanne Barfield, who runs the Ashfield and Mansfield support group, asked us if we would help and get water into Kirkby, and that's what we did. But your communication was absolutely disgraceful. So if you want to invest in something, I suggest that you invest in making sure that you communicate properly. We was out, and there was a group of 7 of us, and we were out till 1 o'clock in the morning delivering water to pregnant women, to people who were isolating, and actually to some of the elderly who were contacting us through Facebook. And that in itself is the biggest disgrace, because they couldn't get through to you on the phones. Your phones were just blocked, they couldn't get through, or they were sitting there for hours. And it's not right. And we pay our water rates, and people pay enough money for you to give good service. We do understand the difficulty, and there's no problem with that. But when you have a difficulty, you must forward plan so that you can cover all the things that people want. And we never had anything in Kirkby and Ashfield where people could go and get water, because that would have solved a lot of things in Kirkby.
So I'll just take one more question from Peter there, then can I put these together?
I used to be in charge of King's Mill in 1996, before your time at Severn Trent. We suffered from a very heavy snowfall, and all the power went down. Now in that time, because we couldn't get water into King's Mill, we couldn't fill the main tank up, Severn Trent Water Authority went beyond what they should have done. We had big pools there, tankers from Mansfield Brewery helping us out, pumping it in. But we learned from that exercise. We looked at what we'd got, we looked at the millennium, right, and we were told to look at what equipment we'd got, because there was no certainty that all the computer controls would allow all the pumps to work. Right, you've mentioned 2 or 3 things tonight I'm a little bit concerned about. We seem to be looking at reactive measures rather than proactive. Right. When we did all this at King's Mill, we made sure we'd got enough pumps to pump the water. We've got number 1 pump, number 2 pump, number 3 pump. We did the same for the HV. We looked at what we've got for the HV, the critical path analysis and contingency planning. What happened if that switchgear went out? How would we feed it? Right, what would we isolate to ensure we've got essential services to the patients? Now, it seems that you've perhaps, my hearing's not the best as it should be, I haven't put my hearing aids in, you've perhaps not learned from that lately. You've perhaps looked at those exercises and let them slip into the background. Because if you'd got the right controls on your pumps, you'd have been sequencing into pump. You've already said you look towards night time to fill your reservoirs up. Right, because the demand during the day, normal day, perhaps decreases them. Right, so you've not got the capacity during the daytime with your pipe work and your pumps to fill the reservoirs up. Right, I think what you've got to do for everybody around this, we don't want to be in a situation with bottled supplies. Right, you've got to ensure that your pumps and your circuit diagrams and what happens if this pump goes out, right, what happens if we get a power failure to this, I've not looked at your asset map but I will do, what happens if this asset goes out, have we got a duplicate, how do we switch round, what valves do we close, have you got that type of contingency planning?
We do indeed. So I'll answer both. I'll start with this one and I'll use Steve as well. So we do have that level of contingency planning. As you can imagine, I mean, it sounds like you're, with your engineering background and all that sort of stuff, you're well au fait with this sort of stuff, but you can imagine with the size of the asset base that we have, with the amount of technical complex equipment that we absolutely have to have those level of contingencies in place, and we do. So, you know, you will never get a scenario where you've just got a single pump. It will be a pump and a standby, and sometimes another standby as well. So we've always got sufficient capability to get water into those particular areas. What happened in this instance was the level in the reservoir just dropped below where those pumps are seated in the reservoir. The pumps can't take out any lower. It's a legacy asset, it's been there forever. Where the pumps take out is what we can't drop that anymore. So what we've done is, and we will do, it's not about a manual valve operation, we will automate the ability to bring additional water to make sure if we do see the reservoir level dropping below those pump levels, we'll be able to turn it around very quickly. I mean, just for context, this, and perhaps I don't think I've articulated myself well enough, but these reservoirs don't drop overnight. They are huge. I mean, the reservoirs are big, much bigger than this room, as you can imagine. They drop over a few days. This combined impact of asset problems earlier in the week, having a few more asset issues which took us longer to reset than they should have done, followed by a power failure, is what caught us out.
But didn't you have to increase your asset capacity at Diamond Avenue because the reservoir capacity was too small?
Yeah, that was back in, I can't remember the year.
2 years ago.
Yeah, so we built a new,
Right.
so, and that's, to your point, that is modernising the system. To pick up on one of the other points that Lee read out, you know, people are moving into the area, there's more houses being built, people are using more, and we have to respond to that. So with a long-term plan, and we are rebuilding and renewing assets right across the
It
sector.
just seems to me as a mechanical engineer, a lot of your problems from the May job and this have just related to critical items of plant failing. It's not as though you've had a 24-inch main what's burst and all your water's gone. Right? You've had the inability to pump it either into your reservoirs or into residents' homes.
Agreed, absolutely.
And that is solvable, not by thousands of pounds, perhaps £100,000, increasing the standby and duplicated critical equipment.
Absolutely agree, and I think, I mean, what we go through a process. So as Steve mentioned, I asked Steve to do. Steve doesn't operate on a day-to-day basis. These pumps, they're run by my water treatment team. To be honest, they run the water treatment sites, they run the reservoirs. Steve is more than this, but he's my eyes and ears on the network. Really, he knows what's going on, where it's going on, and how we resolve that issue. So my ask to Steve was go in there, independent, and rush through it all. Really understand what's happened and what we can do about it. What we've come from that is a whole heap of incident root causes which led to the scenario that we saw. We are in the process that we've already done the enhancements I talked about. We've fixed the assets, but we will now look at other opportunities to further. And we do that after any particular incident.
Could we look for this report being made available to the MP and to ourselves of what caused the problems and how you're fixing it?
We can certainly look to do that, and we can.
It would show transparency and honesty, wouldn't it?
Yeah, we can look at the best way of sharing that in a bit more detail. So we will look at what happened and what our options are. Now, I'm teaching to suck eggs now, so forgive me, right, as an engineer. But with these things, you always come up with a long shopping list of, right, this is what we're going to do, and you go through a prioritisation exercise, you look for the biggest bang for your buck, and you will come up with ultimately a solution. So at the moment, our list will be this long. It will probably shrink down to 1 or 2 solutions, which will bring additional water into the area. So that's that scenario. I think in terms of the bottled water station, again, I just want to apologise to you, Julia. I think, is it Julia or Julia? Sorry. Julia. Sorry, Julia. Apologise to you. I think what you did and what your friends did and the group of you did is just incredible. It's a amazing approach to do that for the people, and it's people like you that really make the difference. I can only apologise again for being turned away from the bottled water station. Unfortunately, we have had in the past instances where people do come and take up water and then sell it. We genuinely have had those instances, so people are a bit oversensitive to that. Notwithstanding, that's not an excuse, and we should have had much better control on that, much better handle, and been able to support you more. In terms of communications, I think I've covered off already tonight. You're absolutely right. It was not good enough. We can do a lot more, both on social media, both on phone calls, both on text messages. And again, I would just ask everybody really to make sure we've got those details so we can speak to you directly, and we will definitely improve that in the future. I guess I'm repeating myself a little bit, but just to labour the point here, after anything like this, we really do take these things personally. I have sleepless nights over stuff like this. Steve has sleepless nights over this, and we really do get impacted by this and want to make this difference. It's so important to me that we provide a good service. That's the way I'm wired, really. So we will really scrutinise these things whenever anything like this happens, and make sure that we do absolutely everything we can to try and mitigate anything like this happening again. So just another.
James, just the last one before we wrap up, because we've got this room for an hour. People are asking me, compensation, why is it different amounts, and why haven't some people received compensation?
So our compensation approach is that generally it's based on how long people were impacted for, and that tends to govern the level of compensation. Now, we are still processing those compensation payments at the moment. Some I know have been sent out, others haven't yet, so that is still underway. What we would suggest though is if anybody thinks that they should be getting it, they can of course contact us and we will look into it. But there are agreed amounts based upon whether people were impacted, how long for.
Does it make any difference if you're on a water meter or not? No.
It's a fixed amount.
Fixed amount, okay. So people are saying that some people receive £90, £60, £30. Does that ring true?
The £90 figures,
Okay.
And neither does the 60. But it's typically a standard payment between £25 and £30, depending on the interruption.
So nobody would have received 30, because people are telling me on Facebook Live now that some people received £60 and they've received only £30.
No, that's not correct.
Not correct.
I'm now going to double check that. They certainly shouldn't have received £60.
I mean, I'd rather Severn Trent put the money towards it, making sure they've got an effective system.
Yeah.
But I find it a bit galling when there's people down the same road as me who are saying, we've got £30, And with no acknowledgement to us, or my next door neighbour who's 84.
Yeah, absolutely. So we are.
How the payment was made?
It's usually a so if you pay by direct debit, it's an automatic credit to your bill, typically.
Okay.
So that's people can request it, the cash back, but generally we will reduce the bill by that amount.
Most people I know have been paid £30.
It does tend to vary. People opt for it off the bill. Some people pass for the cash.
Right, so we're gonna wrap it up now. So thanks for coming. Anybody who's watching or anybody who's emailed in over the past 6 or 7 weeks since we had the problems with the water, you'll get like a summary of tonight's meeting. We'll probably send the video out as well, but you'll get a full documentation. We're going to write some notes up tonight, and you'll get a full response. And hopefully it's answered most of your questions. If you've got any questions, then please email me on lee.anderson.mp@parliament.uk. And I hope that in a year's time, I'm not sat here again with Severn Trent, because quite frankly, I've got better things to do in my time on a Thursday night.
Absolutely. And can I just, if I may, Lee, just quickly thank you for allowing us to come, and thank you to everybody that's turned up, shared their views. It's really important. It really helps when we hear the specific examples of what you were dealing with. So thank you for coming along. I know it's Thursday evening, you've probably again all got better things to do. And again, just a huge apology from me personally, as you know, the guys ultimately in charge of this stuff on a day-to-day basis for everything that was impacted. I know I'll speak on Steve's behalf as well for this, so just a huge sorry really, and we're doing our best to make sure it doesn't happen again.
And you can take you off for 2 days to try.